Okay, in my last video we toyed around with setting up Debian on with a newer kernel and a default install, so I figured today we will try to do Arch Linux in a very minimal way. Obviously it's going to already have the updated kernels and firmwares, so those won't be an issue. The latest ISO install is usually at the beginning of the month. So this will still be the December 1st one, which they'll be releasing a new one in a couple of days, which will have an updated kernel and things like that with that install media. But if you're doing a minimal install of Arch, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to select Arch Linux here. I'm going to go here and we're going to go ahead and do some RAM. Go ahead and give it about 4 gigs and then about 4 cores. We'll do about 50 gig. Be more than enough. Arch Linux fine. I'm actually going to customize it because what I want to try, if I can get it to work in the VM, is do UEFI. I don't know if this will work, but we're going to see. And go ahead and begin that install. And that'll boot us up here. I'm going to move this over here. And we'll go ahead and install it. And let's see if I can get this booted up pretty quick here. And that'll just bring you here. So let's just make the font a little bigger. There we go. That way we can see things a little bit easier. So first I want to see what we have. We have the VDA is our main drive here, so I'm going to have to go ahead and do some formatting on that. So we'll just do this easy with CF disk. And we're going to do GTP because we are going to try to use a UEFI on here. Again, I don't know if this will work on a VM, but we're going to try. So I want to do a 1 gig for my EFI partition. You know what? I'll go ahead and do like a 2 gig swap. And then we'll do a rest of it will be just the standard file system. So we'll go ahead and write that and quit. Now we need to set up our file systems. So for our VDA1, which is going to be our EFI, so we'll have to do a makefs vfat for the dev VDA1. And that will make that our EFI. And then we'll do make swap for our dev VDA2. And go ahead and turn that on. And then we're going to go ahead and make we'll do ext4 for our main root partition. And that should do. Now we need to go ahead and mount these partitions. So I'm going to go ahead and mount the main partition here. To mount. And then I want to make a directory for our boot partition. And then we're going to mount the boot partition. And that will get our mounts set up. Now, Arch Linux has their own fstab generator, which makes it a lot easier to set up your fstab. So we want to do that in mount, and for mount, oh, what am I doing? Duh, I've got to set up the pack strap first. So the pack strap will actually install the main, the minimal system, so that we can do that. I jumped ahead a little bit. So we'll do pack strap into the mount where I mounted everything, the base, and I'll go ahead and do base devel. We'll do Linux and our Linux headers. We'll go ahead and do Linux firmware. We will do AMD code because I am using AMD on this system. You would use Intel if you're doing an Intel system. I'll go ahead and do my E2FS progs so I can, and my DOS FS tools in case I need to toy around with the partitions. We'll go ahead and do network manager so I can have internet set up well. We'll do sudo. I like NeoVim for an editor. Git in case I need to pull some stuff in for dot files and such. And then of course fish is my favorite shell. And in theory this should go ahead and download all the packages. What'd I do wrong? Did I spell that wrong? Yeah. I gotta watch my spelling. So now it should install everything. And of course I also messed up and didn't set my my pacman conf to use a faster, you know what, before it gets done, let's go ahead and do that. We're gonna go ahead and vim into etc pacman.conf. Just so this will download a bit faster, I want to go ahead and set the parallel downloads to 10, and that way everything it'll install the packages much faster. So instead of doing one at a time, it'll download 10 at a time, and that will speed up the process there. Again, you gotta watch your spelling when you're typing that stuff in. As I did with Network Manager, that's why I got that error. And I was like, oh, wow, did I forget to mount something or what? But no, I just misspelled Network Manager. And this usually won't take very long on a decent connection because it's not pulling in a ton of packages. This is literally just a very base system that it's pulling in. We're not doing any sort of desktop environment or anything like that. So this will be a very basic base system. A building block, if you will. And that's kind of the lore to Arch Linux is doing that. So we go ahead and get that going. Now it's installing all those packages. Again, should not take very long. And not the missing firmware thing there. That's just where it's pulling in firmware for the kernel, but that's stuff that my system isn't using anyway, so that's not an issue. You'll get those errors, but they literally don't really mean anything. Now we can do the genfs tab, which will generate our fstab for us using the partition scheme that we set up, and that way that'll look good. Now we want to chroot into the actual install. That way we're actually in the chroot environment, so we're in our actual install of Arch. But we got to set up quite a few things to get it bootable. So first thing I like to do is make sure we have our time zones set up correctly. So you'll just do an LNSF that just makes a symlink over from user share zone info. Again, you'll do whatever your time zone is. I'm America, Chicago. I'm not in Chicago, but I'm in the Chicago time zone. and you'll copy that to your etc local time. Again, all this information is on the Arch Wiki, which is basically where this information is coming from. And that way you'll have your time zone set up. I will set up the hardware clock as well. That just makes sure everything is synced up correctly. And then I installed NVIM, but you can use anything like Nano or whatever you would like, or whatever you installed on your system. But I'll use NeoVim, and I will got to set up my locale, and I'll just search for my locale, which is this one. Oops, this one right here. Whoop, is the one I want to use, and that's just the locale for the whole system there. Make sure all the doohickeys work the way they're supposed to, and then we gotta generate our locale. So you'll, oops, generate the locale, and that way we got that part set up. Now you'll want to go ahead and set up the language for the system as well. So I go ahead and go into locale.conf and set up the language for, again, whatever language you are setting your system up for, which mine is the US with the UTF-8. And I believe I spelled everything correctly, and that should be good. And then I like to go ahead and set up my host name, so I'll just echo that. Let me clear the screen here. I'll echo that. We'll do archvert, and we'll put that in our etc host name. That way the system will have its own host name. I'll set up a password for the root account, and that will be the root account password. I also will add a user, the main user that I'll be using. And this will set up the username, its home folder, and then whatever groups I want in. And will give me access to sudo and administrative privileges. And I always put it in audio, video, input, and network. That usually sets up everything I need. I'll set my shell as fish shell, so that's usr bin fish. And then you'll want to set up a password for that new account. So I have the root and that. And if UEFI works correctly on here, I'm going to go ahead and install Grub. That's what I usually use. You can use any kind of boot manager you like, but I'm just used to using Grub. So I'll do Grub, and since I'm trying UEFI, I'll need the boot manager, the EFI boot manager installed with it. So I'll go ahead and do that. That should install. And there we go. So now we got to set up, we have to actually install Grub into the boot partition. And that will allow us to make sure it boots correctly on this particular system. And if I can remember the command. Go ahead. That's my son. He's getting something out of the fridge. And I will set up, let's see if I remember this correctly, the EFI directory, which should be under the boot EFI, or wherever you set up your boot system. And then I like to set up a bootloader ID in case I have a multiple boot system. I'll know which one I'm booting into if I use my BIOS to select it. And I'll just name that Arch. You technically don't have to do that, but that's something I like to do. And if I spelled everything correctly, shouldn't get any errors. Okay, no errors reported. Now, Grub is installed, but you're going to have a actual config file set up for it to run, and that's you can make Grub will make it itself, and you just use the grub make config command -o, and then there's my Sam cam again, so he's hopefully not waking up. Okay, so we will do that, and then we'll do boot grub and then grub config. That will set up our configuration file for grub. I also like to go ahead and set up fstrim, especially if you're using a SSD. That helps with the maintenance on an SSD drive, so I'll make sure that's enabled. That will run fstrim timer from time to time. Okay, that should be good. And I want to go ahead and enable network manager. That way I can have internet when we reboot. I believe that's set up correctly. Should be. One thing I also usually do is I go into Visudo just so that I can have the wheel group, which I set my user under the wheel group so that it will be able to use sudo to do my commands from my user account. So I go into Visudo to edit that file to make sure sudo is going to work. I also usually just because I get tired of now this is something you wouldn't want to do on a system that's used by the public or anything like that, but I usually don't, while I'm in the session, don't allow my password to time out, so I don't have to keep typing in if I'm installing a lot of things on the terminal. Again, this is probably something you don't want to really do. It's not really a good security measure, but since I'm in a VM, I don't really care. That way I don't have to keep putting in the password to install things constantly. And if I set that up correctly, it should work. And again, I'm going to see if UEFI will work correctly under this VM. So we should be able to just go ahead and exit and reboot and see if... Oh, it looks like it did. Okay, good. Good. So it looks like the UEFI did work under the Vert Manager. All right, and then we got that. So does set font work on here too? What is that term? V32N. Oh, I must have spelled that wrong. But anyway, you can set up the font in there usually, and that's it. This is Arch. Let's go ahead and do apt. I'm so used to using Debian. Let's do fast fetch. I think that's the current one. So we get fast fetch on there. There we go. Now we have that done. And so that was just a bare bones simple install of Arch the manual way. Again, you can use Arch install script, which really needs no video to explain it. That's very easy, but that's if you're wanting to install it manually in very few steps, and it gets the system up and running, and you can install whatever you want. If you want i3, if you want Sway, if you want GNOME, go to the Arch wiki and it will tell you how to set up all those sort of things very easily. But that's a bare bones, super easy, super quick way of just getting Arch up and running on a EFI system. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, and I'll probably do some more later. Thank y'all very much.